Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the 2020 New York City Solar and Storage Installer Workshop. I'm Ron Reisman with Sustainable CUNY, and I'd like to welcome all of you for the next 3 hours to hear some very interesting presentations about solar and storage in New York City.
My name is Daniela Leifer, and I'm the project manager of the Smart DG Hub with Sustainable CUNY, as well as one of the DG ombudsmen on our team. So the bread and butter of the work that we do is focused on removing barriers to solar and storage technology in the New York City market by facilitating the development of clear and streamlined permitting processes and also related requirements, largely in collaboration with the city agencies who we heard from last Friday. Along with tools for navigating and streamlining various elements like siting and project applications, and then, of course, educational resources for understanding all of these things. We have a pretty packed calendar for 2020 of a wide range of activities, new publications, events like webinars and stakeholder meetings that we are teeing up for the rest of this year, which we will, of course, try to navigate, as best as we can under the circumstances of COVID-19. So I'm going to just take a few minutes here to go over these next steps that are on the horizon to give you all a preview of what's to come and how these activities and resources can hopefully be beneficial, especially for those of you who are either actively engaged in or planning to pursue energy storage projects, whether in conjunction with solar or otherwise. Before diving into that part of it, the next steps and upcoming projects and everything, I want to first start off just by putting this sort of into the larger context of the DG Hub's central kind of organizational strategy, how we approach our work to begin with, which is all very much based around the engagement of a wide range of stakeholders. That stakeholder engagement really informs everything we do, and the ability to capture the input from really as wide of a relevant audience as possible is really important to us because we need to know what you need. It really helps us help you. So the key thing I just kind of want to highlight here is that we're here as a resource. Reach out for help, for questions. We quite literally organize our work around the needs and requests of stakeholders like you in the audience today. That doesn't mean we'll always necessarily have an immediate answer or solution, but we can try to find the best information available so far, and then it lets us know what the barriers are that are coming up and what priorities need to be focused on. Next slide. So over the next couple slides, I'll provide a little more background information about the work that we've done so far, largely around our storage work. First is this page from our website that I just wanted to bring to everybody's attention. You can access using the shortcut URL at the top of the screen, smartdghub.com. And this shows the primary projects that we've worked on over the last several years. The first link in the top left corner refers to our most recent and ongoing work under a NYSERDA initiative aimed at reducing the soft costs of energy storage. The bulk of the New York City permitting process development that we've facilitated in collaboration with FDNY and DOB has been done under this initiative, and it included the development of technical criteria for battery installations like spacing of units, fire and explosion protections, emergency response planning, et cetera, which fed into the permitting guide that was sort of our signature output deliverable under that project. And the rest of the links here all contain a wide variety of storage-related resources. So especially for those of you who may be fairly new to energy storage, a lot of these will be helpful in providing just kind of a background, a baseline of knowledge about energy storage. In addition to the more recent permitting resources, some of these other resources that we have include case studies of a few early projects in New York State and New York City, a Storage 101 FAQ page, a storage roadmap published several years ago that outlined sort of the initial market barrier kind of landscape in New York City. Several research reports that look at the resilience aspects of storage, and also a mapping tool of critical facilities with social and geographic considerations pertaining to the use of energy storage for emergency and disaster response and resiliency planning. Next slide, please. And on the storage resources page itself, which if you go to the website and are navigating around, you'll get to this. You can see that it's broken out into a few different categories, so you can hopefully find these resources fairly easily. And we're always adding new resources as well. We have 3 new publications that were just released literally in the last roughly month. I think we've got some feedback going on here. I just want to remind everybody to make sure that you're muted. Okay, just picking back up where I left off. We are always adding new documents and resources to our website as well, with 3 new publications that were just released in the past month, which I'm going to get to in a minute or so. Next slide. So a lot of the work that's been done to establish a permitting process, essentially to get from 0 to 1, has really largely been behind the scenes. So I just want to take a minute to show kind of all the hidden steps that have gone into it, just kind of to get some appreciation for everything that's involved. A few key highlights that are shown here in blue and green are the adoption of the FDNY rule and DOB bulletins for storage, which just happened throughout 2019, along with the releases of the outdoor lithium-ion permitting guide, both the original in 2018 and then the updated version just released this past February. The other items include the working meetings that we facilitated with the city agencies starting in 2017 to develop the original recommendations for outdoor permitting, as well as for guidance around utilization of test data from the UL 9540A fire safety test. And there have also been a number of external policy developments from the local and state levels, along with the publication of several national standards as well that have all had some contribution or influence into the overall development process. And these things, of course, don't happen in a vacuum. And we're pretty thrilled to see this chart shows the number of energy storage interconnection applications in blue, along with the number of installations in green. So it looks like, looks like just the tip of the iceberg kind of coming into view on the horizon. So we're excited to see, some initial movement, and we definitely look forward to revisiting the same information, this time next year. So next slide. I had mentioned the 3 recent publications. Just want to go into a little bit more detail about those. The first item here is the 2020 update to the NYC Energy Storage Permitting and Interconnection Guide for Outdoor Lithium-Ion Systems. The original was published in April 2018, and since then, FDNY adopted its Rule 608.1, outlining requirements for energy storage systems for all chemistry types, and DOB released 2 bulletins during 2019, also addressing battery storage permitting as well as zoning. So this updated guide reflects the new information in the rule and the bulletins and incorporates it in as it pertains specifically to lithium-ion systems only. The guide is geared towards lithium-ion systems. We presented a webinar on this some weeks ago, so some of you might find that helpful to be able to hear a presentation walking through the key updates between the older version and the new version. So just wanted to highlight that is available. Next on the list is the New York City Battery Zoning Matrix document, which is designed to expand on the information in DOB's zoning bulletin that was released this past September. The zoning bulletin, I won't go into too much detail, but briefly, the zoning bulletin establishes 2 categorizations for battery projects. The first is whether it's an accessory use versus a non-accessory use battery. And the second categorization is size, above or below 10,000 square foot project footprint. And then based on these 2 criteria, you can use the chart to determine whether your battery project might require additional special permits, such as BSA review or other requirements, such as seeker. Finally, and most recently, we're excited about the recent release of the UL 9540A Data Utilization Guide for New York City. This is intended as a supplement to the Outdoor Lithium-Ion Permitting Guide, and it provides high-level guidance on the steps needed for analyzing and applying the data obtained from the UL 9540A fire safety test. We anticipate doing a lot more activity around this information, and in fact, we will be holding another webinar next Tuesday, April 7th, that should be showing on the screen here, from 12 to 1 p.m. that will provide a detailed walkthrough of this document. We'll provide registration information for that after today's session. And if you would go to the next slide. This is just sort of a sneak preview, a page pulled from that 9540A data utilization guide. The information in that document is organized around a set of 3 data analysis flowcharts, which are part of UL's 9540A test method, documentation. If you purchase the 9540A test method publication, it includes 3 flowcharts for that sort of walk you step by step through how to analyze the data. But our sort of version of the data utilization guide has these red call-out boxes that you see, which basically expand on some of the individual flowchart steps in order to tailor it to the specific needs and requirements of New York City. And so this document really represents a big step forward in the goal of integrating the 9540A testing into the overall New York City permitting process, which really is an extremely important but also complex undertaking. And this guidance document will help to establish a more systematic and streamlined approach for conducting this analysis. Next slide, please. So as far as the next steps and focus areas of things that we'll be working on the coming year, we will continue along, many of the same paths that are currently in progress, including, of course, additional 9540A data analysis resources, other sort of accompanying guidance materials. The flowchart document we just saw, is the first step, and we'll also be doing other work focused around the 9540A data utilization with specific, especially with specific stakeholder groups, such as fire protection engineers. This is a group who will be heavily involved with the actual data analysis for project installations. We will also continue efforts to streamline the project application process for energy storage developers through creation of tools like templated application components and checklists, with the aim that everyone can be working off of standard templates that are designed to provide the information that AHJ plan reviewers need to see, kind of to help take the guesswork out of some of these things. Similarly, we will also continue efforts to streamline the review process on the AHJ side of the equation through development of review assistance tools like an inspection review checklist, deflagration analysis framework, tools like that make the process of reviewing storage project applications more standardized. And then a primary area of work that will launch this year will be the development of guidance, information, and materials for indoor lithium-ion battery projects. I know people are pretty eagerly awaiting that. We're encouraged by the news that UL is developing a listing standard for small indoor battery systems with an anticipated completion possibly sometime this summer. And then also the 9540A data utilization guide will also help feed into that work as well around the indoor guidance efforts. And then we will certainly be hosting future webinars and other training type of activities like this. In addition to the April 7th webinar that I mentioned earlier on the 9540A guide, we're also eyeing a few other topics, including the new certificate of fitness that Nick Petrakis from FDNY mentioned in our session last Friday. This is something that FDNY has been working on for several months now, and we're anticipating it coming out soon. We are planning to do some training sessions on the developer guidance documents as these new tools get published. We discussed doing some sort of targeted sessions on fire alarm and sprinkler requirements in conjunction with FDNY to dig into these more specific elements that as they pertain especially to the large containerized systems. We also anticipate the next zoning bulletin the DOB is working on currently, and plan to, do some relevant training activities around that as well. And we also discussed conducting some kind of educational workshops or sessions around the certificate of approval. This is another key element of the FDNY rule. It's a requirement for battery products to receive a certificate of approval for installation in New York City. This is essentially getting your battery okayed to be deployed in New York City. So we're looking at holding, some kind of educational event in conjunction with FDNY to kind of make those requirements a little bit clearer to the battery manufacturers. And then finally, we are looking to do a project tracking effort to assist the city agencies with sort of keeping track of, not just the numbers of installations, but also to visualize progress towards sort of review timelines and areas of review where perhaps additional, support or help may be needed. Next slide. On the solar side, we do have an exciting new project underway that we're pretty happy about. This is more solar focused and is a new award from NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab, and also the Solar Energy Innovation Network. It's a 15-month fast-track project just getting underway now that is really aimed at pinpointing the barriers specifically to commercial rooftop community shared solar and community shared Solar+Storage. And it's aimed around developing tools and solutions to address those specific barriers. From current data, we know that there's very high demand for community shared solar in New York City from end users. There's a high density of renters and other customers who, for many reasons, are not able to install solar. But community shared solar projects face a lot of issues, including lengthy approvals, high interconnection costs, untapped coupling of incentives, absence of financial data, lack of engaged potential site hosts, and then particularly for community shared solar and storage, a lack of transparency and standardization for these projects. So this effort aims to conduct analyses of these market barriers and identify solutions like host site trigger points, what gets to yes, optimum site locations based on size, return on investment, and grid support depending on location, analysis and guidance around the multiple incentives, and then clear permitting and interconnection pathways, of course. So that wraps up the overview of what's in our pipeline for this year, and we're very much looking forward to diving into all these things and hope that we'll be able to continue helping to move the market forward in New York City. And on this last slide here, I just wanted to put up our contact information again. Please reach out. We're here as a resource. Thanks. I will turn it over to Luke Forster with NYSERDA and Cliff Barada with Con Edison, who will discuss participation in the community shared solar market.
Just a moment, and we'll get Cliff's slides up here. Okay, put them into slideshow format, and
can you hear me?
You're ready to go. We can hear you fine.
I think Luke was going to do his first, correct?
Yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Let's go back. Okay. All right, can everyone see those?
I can see them. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yep.
Great. Okay, this is Luke Forster from NYSERDA. Thanks for having me. Thanks especially to the CUNY team, and especially Ron, Daniela, and Emily for inviting NYSERDA to be on this call. I'll be speaking a little bit about the various incentives that are available for installing PV in New York State, and I'll put a special eye and focus on the community solar market. My name is Luke Forster. I've been in the PV industry about 10 years, at NYSERDA for about, 7.5 years. How quickly time flies. And I work on the Distributed Energy Resources team, so I'm involved both in the PV program and also in the energy storage program. I'll be speaking a little bit on the energy storage side on the next discussion panel. So I'll give you a little bit of context as to what's going on. As you're probably aware, last year we had a new law came out called the CLCPA. That's the Climate Leadership and Communities Protection Act, CLCPA. It's a mouthful, and it contained a number of clean energy and energy efficiency requirements for the state, and this was passed into law, which are very relevant to New York's distributed energy resources market. So first of all, we're talking 100% clean energy by 2040 and 70% by 2030. So we obviously have a lot of work to go in the coming decade and the coming decade after that. Just for reference, I think we're somewhere around 30–35% clean energy today, with most of that being existing hydro plants. Most relevant to today's call is the need for 6 gigawatts of distributed PV. When I say distributed, that excludes the utility scale projects. So anything funded under NYSERDA's large-scale renewables program with REC procurement is not counted in that 6 gigawatt. That 6 gigawatt is all projects 5 megawatts and under. History fans will remember that the original New York Sun program, launched in 2014, had a goal of 3 gigawatts of solar by 2023. The CLCPA expands that goal to 6 gigawatts by 2025. So that gives us just 2 extra years to bump up that goal from 3 to 6. One thing that happened late last fall is NYSERDA filed a petition with the New York Department of Public Service and Public Service Commission, essentially asking for additional funds to expand that New York Sun incentive program up to 6 gigawatts. We're waiting on a final order from the PSC on that, but we expect to hear something perhaps in April. So the PV market's expanding. A few other things in that CLCPA, 9 gigawatts of offshore wind. I'm sure you've seen some headlines about that, and 3 gigawatts of energy storage by 2030. Finally, it's calling for an 85% reduction in economy-wide carbon emissions by 2025. That's not just the electricity sector, but also home heating, vehicles, manufacturing, the whole economy. So that's the context. You can see New York State is very bullish on expanding renewables. I'll talk a little bit about the New York Sun Incentive Program, both in general and where we currently stand today. I know this will be a review for many people on the call, so I'll go kind of quick here. So the idea is we basically chopped up New York State into 3 different regions. The area served by Con Ed, so both New York City and Westchester, Long Island, in what we sometimes call upstate, rest of state, or abbreviate to ROS. And the notion was that each of those markets is going to be a little bit different. It's going to have different levels of activity, different levels of PV deployment. So we didn't want to have the same incentive rate for the whole state. We wanted to treat those 3 markets separately. For instance, as you're all aware, Con Ed has a relatively high retail rate to offset under net metering, but cost of construction, cost of doing business is more expensive down there, as well as permitting, to say nothing of site acquisition. So different characteristics for each of those markets. We additionally broke it up by sector. We have one incentive for residential projects, which are under 25 kilowatts DC per the SIR. We have a non-residential program, which goes up to 750 kilowatts upstate and 7.5 megawatts DC and Con Ed. Then we have an upstate commercial industrial program as well. And again, each of those incentives is tracked separately. I'll point out that as of a few years ago, we fully allocated all of the limited incentive money for PSAG Long Island. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So we called it the Megawatt Block Program, and it was based on a similar program in California. And the idea is that we set an incentive rate, and then once a certain number of megawatts roll in, that incentive rate will automatically drop down to the next block, the next rate, for the next set number of megawatts. So for Con Ed, we're currently at 20 cents per watt for what we're calling residential, which is anything installed on a 1 to 4 family residential building with a residential electric service classification. We have an incentive adder for low income. So if your customer qualifies as low to moderate income, instead of the 20 cents, they can get 80 cents a watt, up to 10 kilowatts. And we have 45 cents a watt for all non-residential. So that's anything from 5 megawatts on a corner store to 7.5 megawatts on a landfill in Westchester. Any non-residential gets that 45 cents a watt. About a year and a half ago, we also introduced the concept of additional incentive adders. We wanted to offer a little bit more incentive money to open up new sites and to try to get additional deployments of new project types. So there's an additional 40 cents a watt for projects on low-income or affordable multifamily buildings. So your incentive would be 45 cents plus 40 cents equals 85 cents. An additional 30 cents a watt for projects on parking canopies, 30 cents a watt for rooftop canopies up to 25 kilowatts, and a dime per watt for projects installed on brownfields or landfills. We know siting is really tough in Con Ed, so we wanted to go that extra mile and encourage additional projects on parking lots, landfills, rooftop canopies, where you wouldn't otherwise be able to site PV. We have full details about how the incentive program works in the program manual. That's on the New York Sun website under Contractor Resources. And the incentives are paid out not to the customer, but to the contractor when the project receives permission to operate. And the idea is the contractor or developer just doesn't invoice the customer for that. They pass through that reduction in the upfront cost. Can be structured as a lease or PPA. Here's just a snapshot of that block design. You'll see we have on the left the residential block, and on the right we have the non-residential block for Con Ed. On the residential side, we're on our last block, number 9 out of 9. The incentive there is 20 cents per watt, and that block's about 120 megawatts or so. In the past, call it 2-3 years, single-family residential deployment has really taken off and boomed in Con Ed. It's grown like wildfire. That's thanks to a lot of developers like you. So that last block, should last a good long time at 20 cents a watt. Deployment's been a bit slower on the non-residential side due to issues like difficulty in site acquisition, a few more challenges in permitting and interconnection, but frankly, it's just getting the land. So, of course, when we're talking about community solar in Con Ed, that would fall in the non-residential block to the right. We're seeing a good number of small projects coming in, maybe 50 to 100 kilowatts, but very few on the megawatt scale, like we're seeing upstate, because you just can't get 15 acres of wide open land down in Con Ed. So that block 7 is 45 cents a watt, and then the blocks drop by about 10 cents each. So we expect that these existing blocks will fully last through 2025, and we are going to maintain those incentive adders. So if you can do community solar on a parking canopy, that's fine. You can capture that parking canopy adder as well. We also have the upstate blocks. This is the Con Ed crowd today, so we're just going to focus on the Con Ed side. As you're aware, we have the solar investment tax credit. I think everyone has a little bit of familiarity in this. Excuse me, cat got my tongue. But I'll talk a little bit about some of the details here. So the investment tax credit is basically locked in when the system receives permission to operate from the utility. In the past, it was 30% of the project costs. of the eligible project cost, I should say. This year it's 26%, next year it'll be 22%, and then 10% in 2022. For all years beyond 2022, it'll stay at 10% of the eligible project cost for non-residential projects, and it'll drop away entirely for residential. This is, of course, assuming that there's no change, on the federal level, which would result in a different or extended ITC. Generally speaking, the ITC is based on the year of project interconnection, but there are two different provisions where you could lock in your investment tax credit at an earlier, higher rate. The first method for safe harboring the equipment is the terminology. You essentially need to spend 5% of your total project cost and buy the equipment in a certain year, and then you can say, no, this counts for this year. So if you bought all your modules this year and interconnected next year, you could probably lock in that 26% investment tax credit. The other provision is for showing continuous work at the site and continuous construction year by year. That takes a little bit more proof to back that up to the IRS. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, we have the New York State residential income tax credit. Again, that only applies to residential installs. It needs to be on a primary residence. It's 25% of the project cost, up to $5,000. And that's nice because it can be taken out of lease or power purchase agreement. Again, if you're doing commercial or community solar, this is not applicable. I've got my nice legal disclaimer up front. If you're a developer, if you're a solar salesman, don't give direct tax guarantees to your customers. Always direct them to talk to their accountant or tax professional, and make sure your sales staff understands that as well. At NYSERDA, we receive a lot of customer complaints, and the number one reason of complaints is just poor or misunderstood expectations during the sales process. So make sure your customer understands what they need to do, what homework they need to do to feel comfortable about their tax credit situation. Next slide, please. We have a number of different incentives out there. Generally speaking, per RP 487, solar installations are exempt from triggering an increase in the site owner's property taxes. Municipalities, whether they're school districts, towns, or counties, can opt out of that exemption. So before pricing on a project, you'll always want to check if there's property tax on the projects. New York City has a nice real property tax abatement program administered by DOB. They renew it, periodically. It's slightly different levels and slightly different provisions. It's currently set at 5% of the project cost for 4 years. 5 times 4 is 20% of the project cost, with a maximum of $62,000. And that's done a lot of good in encouraging development of PV in New York City. PV equipment is always exempt from New York State sales tax. Many local taxes and county taxes do not apply, but you'll want to check your project site to see if you need to owe sales tax on the equipment. Additionally, there are manufacturer's warranties, generally on the modules and the inverters. Let's move on, please. Oh gosh, that was the end.
That seems to be the last slide, Luke.
Thank you. Okay, I believe we're going to take some questions after the Con Ed team presents, so I will remain on the line for that.
Okay, thank you so much, Luke. Just bear with me a minute. I'm going to change slideshows here. Let's get Cliff's up here.
Hi, Ron. I'm back. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine. If you give
Great.
me a second. Let's see. Here we go. We'll start from the beginning, and you're on. Take it away, Cliff.
Great. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Luke for introducing the topic and talking about some incentives. Today I'm going to zoom in even more from what Luke discussed to talk about compensation specifically for community DG or CDG projects. My name is Cliff Barada. I work for Con Edison on the DG Ombudsman team. I've been part of that group for nearly 3 years now. We're a policy-focused group that helps implement state policy mainly related to DG interconnection. And before Con Edison, I worked at a residential solar finance company. So I've been in solar-related world for a little while now. So next slide, please. So 3 topics to cover today. First, I'm going to talk briefly about value of distributed energy resources, or VDER, to put community DG into context. Last year when I spoke about VDER at this event at the Learning Center, I was able to ask everybody by a show of hands who had heard of VDER. Since we can't really do that today, I'm just going to assume that there are at least a few people out there who could use a little high-level refresher of VDER, so I'll dive into that first. Then I'm going to really spend the rest of the time focusing specifically on community DG and the revered community credit. And then I'll close talking about something new that I know a lot of people are excited about, which is new consolidated billing via net crediting model. All right, next slide, please. There are several utility compensation models for DERs in New York and in the Con Ed region. The 2 that I want to focus on today fall under the umbrella of value of distributed energy resources, or VDER. Next slide. VDER was introduced in 2017 as a successor rate to net energy metering, or NEM. It introduced 2 different compensation structures. The first is phase 1 net metering, which is quite similar to traditional net metering. It's a volumetric credit that's valued at the dollar per kWh that the customer pays, and it can reduce all those volumetric charges, the dollar per kWh charges. The VDER order and the VDER policy also introduced the value stack compensation structure. Unlike net metering, it's a monetary credit, and that monetary credit is based on several components, such as the energy component, capacity, environmental, and a few others that projects can be eligible for. A customer who's being compensated under value stack still can reduce their bill, reduce the kWh charges on the energy that they offset, but then the excess credits are valued at the value stack on a monetary basis. And then the other thing I just want to point out here is that unlike phase 1 NEM and traditional NEM, value stack credits can be applied to all electric charges. So that's why I have that little chart on the bottom left. It's worth noting that many of our demand build customers can have the largest portion of their bill made up by the demand charge of their bill. Under net metering, the DER would not be able to offset that portion of the bill, but under value stack, you actually can offset that demand charge. Okay, next slide, please. So who gets VDER, be it phase 1 NEM or value stack? Several different technology types are eligible for VDER. I think the most relevant ones today are probably PV and energy storage. The eligibility criteria changed a little bit back in June 2019 based on a PSC order from April of that year. The capacity ceiling for value stack stayed at 5 megawatts, but the phase 1 NEM eligibility actually increased, so now you could now do up to 750 kW for an on-site project and still be eligible for phase 1 NEM. And any type of customer is eligible for value distributed energy resource service, whether it be mass market or non-mass market customer types. Next slide. Here's where we're going to start getting into community solar or community DG. There are 4 major customer and crediting types. The first is the simplest, which is really a residential or small commercial customer, a mass market customer who decides to put solar on their roof because they want to benefit from the credits. That's on the left side of this slide. Then there's also what we call large on-site customers who are demand build customers like an SC9 or maybe an SC8 large apartment building. And again, they could put solar or any DG on their building and be eligible to offset their own bill with credits generated. Remote net metering is the first type where you can actually have what some people call virtual crediting. Remote net metering allows a host account to share credits generated on one site with other satellite accounts that are owned by the same customer. So if ABC Co. has a building out in Queens that has a ton of roof space, they could put solar there and share the credits with their building in Manhattan that has no roof space and is always in the shade. And then finally, which is going to be a focus for really the rest of my time today, is community DG. And this is where, similar to remote net metering, you can share credits, but it actually allows you to share credits with any customer. It doesn't have to be owned by the same account owner. There are some eligibility criteria, and I encourage you to read our CDG procedural guide, but most important thing is you could put solar in one area within Con Ed service territory and share those credits with any other customer within the Con Ed service territory. Same goes with other utilities. As long as you're within that utility's territory, you can share credits. Next slide, please. Just briefly on compensation. What we're really going to be talking about today and what Luke alluded to earlier is that when you're talking community DG, you're really talking value stack. Phase 1M is for mass market and for large on-site up to 750 kW. Everything else, you're in the realm of value stack compensation. Next slide. So now let's focus on CDG. Why are people so excited about CDG in New York? As Luke mentioned, and as I'm sure many people know, that the big benefit for customers is it allows you to get access to credits from DG when you may not have access to putting up your own solar or energy storage on your own site. However, one of the other reasons that people are really excited about CDG in New York is that there's this fairly lucrative incentive in the form of the community credit. So on the left side of the slide, you can see the old version, the previous version of the incentive for CDG, which was called the Market Transition Credit. Along with that April 2019 order that became effective in June of last year, the MTC transitioned for Con Edison to the community credit. And this is a 12 cent per kWh credit for any energy that's exported to the utility grid. And the size of the tranche, for lack of a better word, is 350 megawatts. As of a few days ago, 220 of those 350 were claimed, so there's about 130 remaining. A couple of important things to note, still on the same slide. Unlike the MTC, which was only for SC1 and SC2, or mass market customers, all subscriber types, including demand bill customers, can receive the community credit. PV projects are eligible for the full community credit. Fuel cell projects are eligible for a lower version of the community credit since they're a higher capacity resource. And then if you do Solar+Storage, you can be eligible for the community credit. Standalone storage not paired with solar, you can do community storage, but you're not eligible for the community credit. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. Now we talked about compensation. I'm going to spend the rest of the time really talking about the nuts and bolts of how CDG works. So how does the customer receive their credits? How does the CDG sponsor or program administrator get paid? Late last year, the PSC released an order that kind of changed how this can work. So they ordered utilities to implement what they called net credit billing for CDG. So implementation is targeted in early next year. Con Edison and other utilities filed an implementation plan in February of 2020. And basically what this order says is it ordered utilities to make CDG billing simpler. So I'll get into exactly what that means in the next few slides, but at a high level, it allows utilities to give CDG subscribers a net credit based on what they pay Con Edison, net of what they would pay their CDG sponsor, and then the utility would also remit fees to the CDG sponsor. Next slide. So it's important to understand the landscape and the players involved in a CDG arrangement. So there's the electric utility, and if you're in Westchester or the 5 boroughs, that means Con Edison, responsible for interconnection, billing, and crediting for any energy exported to the grid. CDG sponsor might also be known as the host or the program administrator. That is a utility customer, so they have a bill, and they own community DG, and they're allocating credits based on the exported energy. So upstate, this is often giant plots of land in a farm. Down in the city, it might be large rooftops. In Staten Island, I know we do have some ground-mounted as well. Then finally, there's a CDG subscriber. You might also refer to them as a satellite. That's anyone who's signing up to receive credits. Next slide. So this shows how CDG billing and crediting works today. This is the current state. So right now, a CDG host would enroll a CDG subscriber. So that's on the bottom left and bottom right. And they would request, they would send the utility an allocation percentage to say, hey, if I'm generating 100%, I want you to give 10% to each of these 10 different customers. So that's step one. Then step two is at the end of the month, the utility is going to calculate the value of the host export, let's call it $100, and allocate those credits to the subscriber bills. So the CDG subscriber would receive, in this example, $100 credit less off of what they owe. So the customer would still have a utility bill that they need to pay to Con Edison. And then in a separate transaction, this is number 3, the subscriber would have to pay the host a subscription payment. So typically a percentage of the credit. So that's an arrangement outside of the utility, and it's something that the CDG sponsor has to convince the CDG subscriber to sign up for. So a few downsides of this method that were pointed out in the PSC order is that the subscriber, the customer, has added friction from having to pay 2 bills. So this can be a challenge when a DER developer is trying to convince someone to sign up. And then the other challenge or downside can be that the CDG host sees credit risk. So they don't know, is this customer going to be able to pay me every month? So those are 2 things that the new method on the next slide seeks to mitigate. So in the new method, still the same three players. Step number one is still pretty similar. The red text is what's new and different compared to the last slide here. So the CDG host would still enroll the subscribers and let the utility know how much to give to each subscriber. But the CDG host would also provide a savings rate to the utility, and that's how much the subscribers are actually going to keep. So in this example, you can see that the host told the utility, we want the subscribers to keep 10% as the savings rate. So step 2, every month, utility would calculate the value of the export and allocate the credits, but now they would multiply that by the savings rate. So before, if they would have gotten a $100 credit, now they're getting a $10 credit. But step 3 is what makes this simpler. No longer does the subscriber have to then pay the host separately. Instead, since the utility is only giving $10 instead of $100 to the subscriber, they're actually going to remit the remaining portion to the CDG host. And the reason you see $89 there and not $90 is because there is a 1% utility fee. So as I mentioned before, this can really help mitigate the risk of CDG subscribers not paying, and it makes it potentially less friction, easier to get a CDG subscriber, a customer, to sign up for this program. And I'll just close by saying, just reminding you, this is what you can read the implementation plans that were put out in February, and the target implementation date is January of 2021. Thanks.
Thank you, Cliff. And it's 10:30, so I'm going to ask Emily, since we have about 10 minutes until the end of this session, if we have any questions that have come in.
Thank you, Ron. We don't have many questions. There was one clarification that came in that I'd like to make, is that the property tax abatement in New York City, currently through January 1st, 2021, is capped at $62,500 per year. So that is $62,500 per year for up to a 4-year term. And just a reminder that that cannot be above the amount you're currently paying in taxes per year. But just based on a question that came through here, I just wanted to clarify that that's annually.
Thank you for the clarification.
Oh, okay. We just got another question right now. All right. So the question here is, will the utility charge the host a fee to do the administration for community solar?
So I assume this question is for me, related to the new consolidated billing or net crediting model. The fee is that 1% utility fee that you saw on my last slide, and that's built into the PSC order. So other than that, there wouldn't be a fee. That would pay for kind of the administrative side of what utilities are doing in order to set up this system and model.
Okay, great. All right, so we're getting another question in here live. Can Cliff please clarify if standalone storage is eligible for the community credit, or how storage can be, quote, remotely net metered, unquote, to a solar installation to be eligible as Solar+Storage DG project?
Sounds like there's a few questions packed in there.
You want me to chat it to you? No? Would that be helpful?
I'm sorry?
Just since there were quite a few words there, would you like me to chat it to you so it's in front of you as you answer?
Sure, that would actually be great. I can definitely answer the first part. So for a standalone storage system, so then it's not paired with any other technology, the you can do community storage, but it's not eligible for the community credit. The next part is how storage can be remotely net metered to a solar installation to be eligible for Solar+Storage. Not exactly sure what this means, but it sounds like maybe it's just an AC coupled Solar+Storage. If you have solar and storage behind the same utility account, then you can be eligible for the community credit. There was another order that came out, I think, in late 2018 or early 2019 that actually explained the different hybrid configurations and how PV plus storage crediting works under the value stack. So it depends on if you're charging from the grid, if you're charging your battery from the grid or only from solar. And I would encourage you to look at that order, and there's actually a nice 2-page or 3-page summary of it that the PSC put out. But basically, it's if you're charging your battery exclusively from the solar, then all of the export from the system is eligible for the community credit. If you're charging the battery, if there's unrestricted charging, you could charge from the grid and from the solar, then there's some netting out that utilities will do so that you don't get the community credit for what I refer to as brown electrons. So charging the battery from the grid and then discharging those same electrons back to the grid. So hopefully that answers that one.
Great. Yeah, I think that's all the questions we have for now. Please feel free to keep sending the questions to Sustainable CUNY, and we'll get them answered as time allows. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Emily. We are about 5 minutes ahead of schedule, but considering that our next session features one of the speakers from the last session, so we know he's here, I think we'll just move right into participating in the energy storage market, and maybe we'll have some extra time at the end of that for questions. So what I'll do now is reintroduce Luke Forster from NYSERDA. We've already got his slideshow teed up. And then Luke is going to be followed by two gentlemen from Con Edison, Griffin Riley from their non-wire solution section, and Mohammed Kamaluddin from distribution planning. So I'll turn it back over to Luke now to tell us about energy storage.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Ron, thanks for the introduction. It's been a while since I've spoken to all of you. I'm going to be speaking more on what NYSERDA is doing in terms of energy storage offerings and the incentives that are currently available. So let's move on to that next slide, please. Okay. We spoke a little bit previously about the CLCPA. And next slide. So to recap, it's one of the most aggressive greenhouse gas reduction goals of any major economy, 40% economy-wide by 2030, and then 85% economy-wide. That's transportation, residential, manufacturing, and electricity sector by 2050, including 100% zero carbon electricity by 2040. And if you've done some reading on this topic, you'll know that often the dirtiest power producers are the peaker plants that run on those high demand days, typically in summer when everyone's running their air conditioner. That's when those especially dirty gas plants turn on and have the greatest greenhouse gas emission per unit of energy produced. So the great thing about energy storage is we can take energy generated by cleaner power sources, ideally PV or other renewables, store that energy, and then discharge that energy to the grid during peak events, so we don't need to run those peaker plants as much. And the CLCPA also has other benefits relating to carbon neutrality, environmental justice, targeting disadvantaged communities, and a just transition as well. there are a number of working groups under development to ensure that the transition will occur on time, and will also have social benefits as well. So let's do the next slide, please. Storage goals. Next slide. So per the CLCPA, our goal is 3 gigawatts of energy storage by 2030, and we have a sub-goal of 1,500 megawatts, 1.5 gigawatts by 2025. So to reach that initial goal of 1.5 gigawatts, NYSERDA received a budget from Public Service Commission of $405 million. And we looked in our crystal ball and said, gosh, how are we going to get to 1.5 gigawatts of storage by 2025 with this budget, knowing that there are different sectors, different use cases, and different ways of deploying storage. So we didn't want to put all the eggs in one basket. We wanted to ensure that we're seeing small-scale residential and retail projects and large-scale bulk projects as well. So we split the budget up. We decided to go with about $150 million initially for bulk projects. And when I say bulk, I'm talking about projects greater than 5 megawatts AC. So they're not playing on the distributed network. They're participating directly in the NYSO wholesale markets for energy, for capacity, and for other ancillary services. These projects generally have a lower cost per kilowatt hour to install, but they have a much longer development and build time than smaller retail projects. Then we put another approximately $150 million for retail projects on the distributed scale. These are projects under 5 megawatts AC. So most of these projects ended up being paired with renewables, especially solar, and particularly community solar. And these projects are receiving compensation through the value stack tariff in most cases. We had a carve-out of RGGI dollars for Long Island to the tune of about $55 million. And that $55 million we split between a bulk budget for Long Island, a retail budget, and actually a single-family residential budget there. Then in that initial budget, we had $51 million left over, not extra funds, so to speak, but we really wanted to see which segments would take off and where the greatest deployment opportunity was before committing those funds. So we're keeping that $51 million in reserve so we can allocate that to the most active, most promising markets and get those megawatt hours deployed. We're seeing that most of the project proposals coming through are for chemical energy storage, but thermal, mechanical, other types of technologies are eligible for these incentive dollars as well. So let's move on to the next slide. I'll talk a little bit about the large program, the bulk program. And we do have a lot of information available on the NYSERDA Energy Storage website. We have a subpage on the bulk program, one on the retail page, and we have a program manual for each program that lays out the eligibility requirements and all the terms and conditions. So if you're a developer and you're looking to develop a bulk program greater than 5 megawatts, you can essentially go through 3 different routes to receive an incentive. The first is through NYSERDA's standard offer bulk incentive program. We have an incentive rate available per megawatt hour for projects over that 5 megawatts. It's a standard offer. Similar to New York Sun, there is a megawatt or megawatt hour actually block, and as capacity fills, those funds are allocated. Each of the utilities had an RFP, request for proposal, for dispatch rights. There was an initial offering of 350 megawatts, 300 megawatts in Con Ed, and 10 megawatts apiece for each of the other investor-owned utilities. They put out that RFP, received bids, and then that RFP closed. Con Ed has not yet announced the results of that. There may be a second year based on what the results are from this initial year's RFP. And the idea is that the utility would essentially manage the energy storage program for a number of years, I believe it was 7 years, and provide revenue to the developer, and NYSERDA would provide any additional necessary incentive support to make that project pencil out. So we're waiting on results from Con Ed and from the other investor-owned utilities, but that's a pretty novel business model, and I think that'll get some good traction. Finally, the third option is to develop a renewable program through a NYSERDA's large-scale renewable program through the REC auction and pair a large-scale energy storage project with a renewable. For instance, NYSERDA's had a number of years of solicitations and awards, and a good number of developers are pairing storage onto those large-scale wind or solar projects. Next slide, please. Let me currently show you where we are. This is the Upstate Bulk Program, currently available for projects outside of Con Ed and Long Island. You'll see that we've allocated about half of that $150 million budget and committed award letters to about 360 megawatts or about 1,400 megawatt hours. The initial incentive rate is $85 to $110 per kilowatt hour, and you'll see from later slides that's much lower than the retail rate. And projects not going through the capacity market would receive a slightly reduced incentive rate of 75% of the base. We're discussing opening this up for projects in Con Ed as well, but that hasn't officially hit the street yet. Let's move on to the next slide, please. Here's a little bit more flavor in detail on that utility managed request for proposals. This fall, it happened, there were 300 megawatts of proposals for Con Ed and 10 megawatts apiece available for each of the other utilities. NYSERDA worked with the investor-owned utilities behind the scenes, and we will provide funding as necessary to make whole those projects if there are awards made. In the incentives, in the projects requesting an incentive greater than our standard offer bulk incentive would not receive a higher incentive. So we're capping the NYSERDA support there. And we're very excited to hear those results from Con Ed and the other utilities in the coming months. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit more about peaker plants. These are, generally speaking, the most highly polluting energy producers in New York State. Many of them are located downstate in Con Ed territory, and unfortunately many of these are located in the environmental justice communities or locations that are generally considered low to moderate income. So there's a strong policy desire, both from NYSERDA and from New York State in general, to reduce the operating hours of these highly polluting plants and either installing energy storage at that plant or installing it, at that same substation or node has a lot of potential to reduce the emissions from these plants while not removing from grid stability. Next slide. And we see there are about 3.3 gigawatts of older peaking plants. They're coming under new regulations from DEC, and these plants will be required to take some sort of action to reduce their emissions. And time will tell how many of those are pairing with storage, how many of them are just shutting down, or how many of them are taking alternate solutions to ensure that they'll be cleaner in the future and in compliance. Next slide. And this is just saying that we had a nice study that went and examined the technical potential for pairing storage with these peaking plants. And we found that a great majority of them could achieve DEC compliance by adding on storage. Next slide. Okay, now I'll talk more about a matter of more immediate interest to this crowd, which would be the retail incentive program. So these are projects up to 5 megawatts. They can be coupled in Con Ed. Similar to the New York Sun program, we divided the state into different regions: rest of state, Long Island, and New York City. One caveat I want to call out is Westchester is not included in New York City. That was initially part of that rest of state block, and we're actually moving to having a separate Westchester block in the near future. and we are capping the project at 15 megawatt hours. So that'd be 5 megawatts times 3-hour duration, or another combination of size and duration that's equivalent. The incentive is paid in dollars per kilowatt hour, and it's a declining block. So as more and more projects are submitted, that dollar per kilowatt hour steps down. Projects of 5 or greater hours of duration would receive a reduced incentive. And the incentive is fully paid out when a project is complete and has permission to operate. In order to lock in that sort of incentive, the utility interconnection study must be complete and a 25% utility payment must be made. And we're looking to see that some steps have been taken with the planning and zoning boards. Not full approval, but we're looking to see that that presentation has been made to the municipality. So we're looking for 2021 fire code requirements, and NYSERDA will perform a field inspection on each completed project. Next slide, please. Okay, so the Con Ed team spoke a bit and provided great information about the value stack. As you're aware, the value stack is going to provide compensation rather than net metering for these projects. And the value stack awards a different rate per kilowatt hour based on the benefits a project provides to the grid. So if we have a project that's putting kilowatt hours onto the grid during a period of high congestion and high demand in a location on the grid where there's high demand for energy, the value per kilowatt hour is going to be much richer than a project, say, in a rural upstate area. So the potential here is by taking an energy storage project, you can charge up those batteries during a time period of low demand and discharge them during a period of high demand. This will result in a greater value stack payment through the capacity, through the DRV, demand reduction value, and potentially through the LSRV, the location-specific release values. There's also potential to try to arbitrage and make good on fluctuations in the wholesale energy value. So let's move on, please. So here we have the 5 value stack components. And as I mentioned, energy, capacity, DRV, and LSRV can potentially be used to maximize value from the project by charging when those values are low and discharging during peak windows when those values are high. We had some changes and improvements made to the value stack about 1.5 years ago in that phase 2 order, which provided greater certainty about when those demand reduction value hours were and when those LSRV hours were as well. So if you have a standalone storage project charging from the grid or a storage project charged by PV or another renewable, you have a very clear, predictable window for when your ICAP alternative 2 and your demand reduction value windows are. And that's going to make it pretty easy to model what your revenue would be for those discharges. Do the next slide, please. And I'm going to show you where we currently stand with the NYSERDA energy storage retail blocks. So you'll see on the left side, we have 4 blocks in the retail program. This is for the upstate region. And you'll see those 4 blocks. The blue ones are fully allocated and fully reserved. So our budget for the upstate region has been fully expended. I'd say about 95% of those projects were community solar projects coupled with storage. You'll see in the middle of the screen, we have the Con Ed New York City blocks. You'll notice it starts with block 2 rather than block 1. Block 1 was shared with the upstate, and it just so happened that all of block 1 went to the upstate. So you'll see that essentially we don't have any projects yet in New York City that have made those milestones and submitted to the incentive program. As Daniela indicated earlier, there are a number of steps projects need to go through with permitting and interconnection, and we know it's taking developers a while to go through those steps. We know there's a good amount of projects in the utility interconnection queue going through their studies, They just haven't made it to the NYSERD incentive program yet, but we're keeping a close eye on that queue. And finally, on the right, we have the Long Island program. We've had 1 or 2 projects come in, but similar to Con Ed, it's been a slow uptake so far. You'll see these are pretty rich incentive rates, currently $300 per kilowatt hour in Con Ed and $250 per kilowatt hour in Long Island. So we're going to continue to work with developers and encourage action in these blocks. Similarly, we put a proposal in our operating plan for a Westchester specific block. So expect some news on that in the near future. Finally, I'll talk a little bit about residential PV plus energy storage. Next slide, please. So as we're aware, net metering is still available for residential projects throughout the state, upstate, Con Ed, and Long Island as well. Under net metering, there is really not an incentive or any financial gain a customer can have by adding energy storage on to their PV project. There's not like an off-peak, on-peak time. But there's a very interesting offering that LIPA put out last year. They call it the Dynamic Load Management Program. And essentially, they're going to pay $40 or $60 per kilowatt for each kilowatt that an energy storage project discharges to the grid during certain peaking events throughout the year. So there's a nice financial incentive or reason put out by the utility, price signal for customers to follow. So I sort of jumped on that as well. We decided to use part of our Long Island storage budget to come out with an offering for residential PV plus storage in Long Island. The initial block is $250 per kilowatt hour, capped at 25 kilowatt hours per project. And let's move on, please. And we've had some good uptick in that Long Island project as well. I think about 20% of that initial block has been subscribed and interest is high. Finally, I just want to touch on some other work NYSERD is doing with energy storage. As many of you are aware, we have the New York State Solar Guidebook that we initially put out a few years ago with guidance on permitting, zoning, project development. The idea is we wanted to put as many resources together as we could that would be of interest not only to developers, but more so to municipalities, planning boards, zoning boards, and building inspectors. We followed suit and started developing a similar book for energy storage. So the initial version of the New York Battery Energy Storage System Guidebook is online, it's available, it's for free, and we're going through and we're continuously adding content in there and updating content as the codes change. So I encourage you to take a look at that as well. And if you're working with a municipality that's looking for resources, or if they have hesitation and cold feet about engaging with a storage project, you can provide them with this resource. And I'm going to wrap up here and pass it over to the Con Ed team. But thank you for letting me talk a bit about NYSERDA's current storage offerings.
Thank you, Luke. And just as a reminder for the people on this webinar, Luke will be staying with us. So if you have any questions on what he just presented, I would ask you to submit them through the chat box to questions Sustainable CUNY, and then we'll get to those at the end of this session. So right now we've got Griffin Riley, and I will just load his slides up here. Sorry for this delay. Here we go. Okay. Bear with me one more second here while I put this up on the screen. All right. And there, we've got it running. So Griffin, it's all yours.
All right, good morning. Just make sure you can hear me. Yeah, you can still hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Griffin Riley. I'm the Section Manager for Targeted Demand Management at Con Edison. I lead the Demand Response and Non-Wire Solutions team, and what we do in Targeted Demand Management is try to lower the load on our system during our peak times. So what we're focusing on isn't really so much about the energy per se. It's more about the capacity of our system and what it can, what kind of throughput that it can handle. Demand response is system-wide, so all 5 boroughs in Westchester have demand response programs, and non-wire solutions are only in areas where we're seeing the demand grow beyond some capability of our system, and we're trying to specifically defer the need for that upgrade. Now, last year at the Learning Center, I did go over a bit more of the non-wire solution process, and this year, I'm not going to do that because we currently don't have solicitations out to market, but towards the end of this discussion, I will show you where you can find more information about that and just give a quick rundown on the status of those current projects. So for now, I'd like to just talk a little bit more about our demand response program. So the slide here, I'm sure everyone is familiar with energy efficiency, and the larger department I'm in is the Energy Efficiency and Demand Management Department, and we have a lot of programs to help incentivize folks for installing more efficient equipment, be it lighting or HVAC equipment or many other types of opportunities, and you can find more about that online. Specifically about demand response, what demand response is in terms of the utilities programs are programs that pay customers to change their behavior during our peak days, either be system peak days, or if we're having some issues on one of our networks and we're trying to lower load on a network during those system issues, we also have those programs. But let me be very clear here. The idea behind demand response is that you usually would ride through the day, and looking at the bottom of this slide in the example there, you would have some normal load that you would be using, and when we call the event, you either turn things off or turn on distributed generation to flatline your curve. And the way these programs work, each customer bids in how much they're going to be able to curtail for us when we call, and we base the reductions that are given to us based on previous days, similar days within the last 30 days of your usage. So it's only when you actually change your behavior we would be able to see that change within the demand response program. So if you're participating with a battery storage system, that would work great if you're not always discharging that battery storage system in the hours that we are calling the event. If you normally use that battery for something else, and then you pledge into our programs and you discharge over the 4-hour response period, we would be able to measure using your utility meter what your reduction is, because we would actually see a change from previous days. And that's a very important element of how our program, it is based off of calculating something that didn't happen.
I got some stuff you got in there.
If we could ask everyone to please mute themselves if they somehow got unmuted. Thank you.
So again, that's the critical element, is that we have to calculate something that didn't happen in order to be able to pay for demand response. And so it's critical that our baseline methodology, people understand how that works if they're going to be pledging into our programs. Next slide, please. So the one of 2 programs we have under Rider Key, which is our commercial demand response program, is the CSRP program. And what this program does is it seeks to lower the load in all of our networks on days where we are forecasting 92% of our peak system load or greater. So the day before, we look at our forecast, and if we are seeing high loads forecasted for the next day, it would trigger this program. And we give 21 hours of notification to all of our participants. And then the day of, we give 2 hours notification saying, yes, we're still go. and then we have everyone lower their load in the time frame that they've been pre-assigned. So prior to the start of the season, each network within our service territory is assigned a 4-hour window, and there are 4 windows that we have, starting at 11 o'clock in the morning and ending at midnight. And each network is put in a window based on when that network peaks. So this is not a system peak reduction. This is network peak reduction. And those windows can change as the topography of any given network starts to change. So if you see more residential start to build into a network, you would see a peak later in the evening, and so you might have a window shift later. The alternative is you see more businesses enter into an area, the peak might start coming earlier. And so every year my team looks at each network and where it's peaking, and then we reassign each network that 4-hour window. And that information is available online for everyone to see, and also is verified when you enroll into the program. Next slide, please. The next one is our distribution load relief program, and this is a 2-hour notification program that we activate a network at a time for the most part. So when we are having some issues within one of our networks, be that on a peak day or a non-peak day, it could be any day during the 5 months of demand response season, which is May through September, we could activate this program. And so what this program asks for people to do is deliver reductions with only 2 hours of notification. And if we don't give a full 2 hours, we still do require a response within a couple of hours after we've given notification. And the performance to this program is based on your top 4 out of 6 hours after we call you. So the idea here is that this gives us relief when needed if we're having something going on in our system, like we have a couple feeders out potentially, or there's a supply issue, and we're just looking to deload our system. So for batteries, this is great. If they're ready to go and charged and have some reserve there, they're able to ramp up pretty quickly. And also this is good for folks that have building management systems that allow for reductions relatively quickly. And then there are some customers that choose to participate with just manual demand response as well. Next slide, please. In terms of the incentive rates of what you can earn in these programs, they do vary a little bit by where you are. The CSRP program gives a reservation payment of $18 per kilowatt per month, except if you're in Westchester and Staten Island, where that amount is $6. And the DLRP program has 2 tiers. We have roughly 80 load areas, and 10 of those load areas are considered top tier 2, and those are areas where we have calculated a more likely probability of having some reliability issue occur. And it's always the top 10 as indicated by our reliability index. Those can change every year as well in terms of tier 1 or tier 2, and we do update those prior to the start of every season. So if you are a customer in Manhattan and you enroll in both of these programs, let's say in a tier 1 DLRP network, you have the potential for 100 kilowatts of enrolled to earn $18,000 for the season if you are in all 5 months of our program. For those of you who are pending enrollments, I would like to just note that tomorrow is the deadline for enrolling if you'd like to get all 5 months. If you miss the deadline tomorrow, then you will not be getting a reservation payment for the first participation month of May, but you still have an opportunity to enroll in the program until the end of April, and then you will be getting reservation payments for June through September. Next slide, please. In order to participate in the demand response program, you need to have a communicating interval meter or one of our smart meters already installed. And that was the barrier to entry in the past. Only our largest customers really have these communicating interval meters. But now that we have smart meters being deployed and rolled out in great quantity, we are seeing enrollments increase because people are already getting these communicating interval meters for free. You have to pledge 50 kilowatts or greater of reduction. So if you don't have 50 kilowatts, you can pledge through an aggregator who will pull together multiple customers to get to that minimum criteria. And if you can pledge over 50 kilowatts, you can still participate with an aggregator, and they, can work with you on a number of other things regarding your energy usage in your facility. But you do not have to. You can directly enroll with Con Edison with 50 kilowatts or greater. If you don't enroll, you can still voluntarily participate in the program. Of course, you need to tell us about yourself. You're going to need to reach out to us, but you don't necessarily need to do that by the deadlines here that I just mentioned. You can just reach out to us and enroll, and then we will pay you if we call an event, but you do not get the reservation payments. So for more information, you can go to coned.com/DR, and you can also email the team directly at dr@coned.com with any of your questions if you'd like some help enrolling. Finally, we are working on, next slide please. We are working on a new program for this year, and this was a direct result of the storage order from December of 2018. My team published a plan for meeting that storage order requirements just a couple months ago with the Public Service Commission, and we are awaiting approval for our plan. So this slide just gives a high-level overview of what that plan is. What this is a new type of demand response. It's going to exist outside of our tariff, which is Rider T, and what this will be is direct contracts with Con Edison for supplying demand response, and it will be procured through a competitive procurement. So our intention will be every year going forward to release an RFP in Q3 of the year for resources that would be contracted to be online not the next season, but the season after that, which gives enough time for contracts to be signed for battery storage systems specifically so that folks can get those projects aligned with their financing known in terms of what they're going to get from our programs. With the exception of this year, we will be doing a couple of those. I'm sorry, I got a little ahead of myself with the timing, so I'll come back to that. In terms of our programs, what we're looking for is resources that will sign contracts with us for 3 to 5 years that can do a combination of CSRP and DLRP requirements. So we are looking to, for the day-ahead DLM program, to give 21 hours of notification. And if we happen to know of a system issue that we're having, we would still dispatch folks, so we would also be used for DLRP needs as well. The auto DLM category, the day-ahead DLM category is for everyone. Anybody who wants to have certainty in how much it will be paid for demand response for the next few years, because our programs can change year over year in terms of the cost, the price that we pay. Anyone who wants that certainty can bid into this day-ahead RFP for day-ahead DLM. Auto DLM is designed for resources that can dispatch very quickly. So it's like our DLRP program, but rather than give 2 hours of notification, we want to give 10 minutes of notice. So for folks that can respond very quickly, this is the category for them if they're looking for a multi-year contract between 3 to 5 years. And that's what we're thinking is perfect for batteries, but also, again, customers that have building management systems that can respond quickly. So we are looking forward to putting out more information on this. Go to the next slide, please. We will be releasing an RFP this October for both 2021 and 2022 procurement. And then in the future, we will be doing that more on the 1.5-year cycle I mentioned a moment ago. But we do want to see if anybody already has battery systems that can pledge for next year. So this year, we will be doing a little bit of different approach, getting for 2 years time frame for resources. And this just gives you a rough idea of what we're looking at in terms of the time frame for locking in those resources. And then, of course, the capability period is the same as our CSRP, DLRP program starting in May of each year, 2021 and 2022. Next slide, please. So that's it for the demand response component. In terms of the non-wire solutions, we have been putting out requests for proposals into the market for the last couple of years. And a couple of times we've done direct battery storage procurements looking specifically in the Water Street and Newtown areas. Right now, we don't have any active non-wire solution solicitations occurring, but everything is listed on our website at coned.com/nonwires, and all of our previous RFPs are available for you to go there and look to see what kind of programs we're looking for and how we rank submissions in terms of proposals and what our T's and C's that we're looking for battery storage contracts are. High level, what we look for in non-wires is a 10-year contract with a battery storage vendor for rights of first dispatch during the 5 months of summer with 21 hours of notification. And we provide 50% of our total incentive after the unit has been installed, and the other 50% is paid over the 10 years based on the performance of the unit when we do call them. Next slide. Finally, this is just a map of the area that we currently have active non-wire solutions. The majority of this region is the Brooklyn Queens Demand Management Program, which started in 2014. This is also the region where we've installed the largest lithium-ion battery system in New York City to date, which is a 4.8 megawatt system as part of that program. And we continue to install battery systems in the Water Street area. Just north of this, where the map says Queens, is our Newtown region, and we're going to be implementing programs in there soon. And we'll be filing soon for more details about that program with the Public Service Commission. But as I said, this is where we currently are, and we may be expanding in the future. So please keep an eye out on our website for any new opportunities that come. And if you would like to be on our mailing list, you can just email us at dr@coned.com. Thank you very much. Now I will pass this off to my colleague Mo.
Thank you, Griffin. And just give us a minute here while we tee up Mo's presentation. Okay, let's try to share this with everyone now. And there we go. We'll put it in slideshow mode. And okay, got to go to Mo. So take it away.
Hey, Ron, can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk on this workshop today. I'm really excited to talk about some of the things that Con Edison is doing energy storage-wise. But I must give kudos to Cliff, Luke, and Griffin for really setting me up on rolling out this deck here. Cliff for outlining that VDER, Luke to go over the different types of NYSERDA incentives, and Griffin to really outline some of the opportunities that Con Edison is offering for energy storage developer. Today's discussion, at the risk of being very repetitive, I'll go lightly on some of the New York State energy storage goal and some of the incentives and funding stream that is available around those goals, as well as some of the drivers for storage plus EV chargers. And then I'll talk very specifically to one of the projects I'm heading, the Nevin Street project, which is a make-ready project in Brooklyn, and then just show you where you could find some of those opportunities. But before I dive into that, my name is Mohammed Kamaluddin. I've been with the company almost 11 years, and I'm leading the energy storage group for distributed, connected, utility-sited storage. Nonetheless, we're also active in many different avenues, pursuing different types of resource to peer storage with, such as solar, EVs, and even regen braking. So I'm happy to be here, and let's get started. Next slide. So as you may recall, early 2018, FERC issued an Order 841 recognizing energy storage as a major asset option and encourages deployment when technically and economically available or feasible. Recognizing this unique opportunity, Con Edison decided to take a closer look at storage and see how this fits into our utility toolkit, so to speak. Fast forward later that year, New York State, in lieu of CLCPA, set out a very aggressive storage goal of 1,500 megawatt by 2025 and rapidly scaling that to 3 gigawatt. At the city level, New York City already had, by that time, 100 megawatt hour storage goal by 2020, but ramped that effort up to 500 megawatt by 2025. In conjunction to that, New York City did something very amazing where they committed to have a 12-month permitting timeline by the end of 2020. And we'll see, we're starting to see traction on that, and hopefully we could achieve that. But we all know that storage doesn't really pencil. It's very difficult to pencil storage, and as such, recognizing this gap, there's a lot of incentives and opportunities that around NYSERDA and New York Green Bank. And at the risk of being repetitive to Luke, I just want to highlight the 5 megawatt threshold for the retail incentive program and the bulk incentive program. And those thresholds are very uniquely placed in terms of how you could capitalize on funding opportunities. And it gives you the flexibility to really evaluate your system and see what is really right for you and what pencils for your particular installation. New York Green Bank also set aside $149 million for the retail incentive program, as well as $150 million for the bulk program. So together, these two entities really provide a good funding opportunity for energy storage, thereby enabling the market. From a utility perspective, I'm running the utility-owned storage deployment, which I'll talk about later. But as these folks before me mentioned, the right for the multi-year dispatch right for procurement on the bulk solicitation, which Luke really highlighted some of the opportunities, as well as Griffin talking about the non-wires and demand response program opportunity, and not precluding the value stack. Together, all these three major entities providing a volume of funding opportunities and revenue stream could potentially, and we're hoping, will make a very positive impact on the bottom line of storage, and thereby enabling the market and foster our way towards this aggressive storage goals. Next slide, please. So when I think about what drives storage, and I'm throwing in EV chargers here because it's going to be specific to the project I'm talking to. But when you talk about storage, it almost seems like a roadmap and a timeline of where we were not too far along, and it's now a mature market of using storage for peak shaving, time as use shifting, and demand charge reduction. Where we are today is basically what I consider the emerging market, the non-wire solutions portfolio being part of a demand response program, or even battery as second life. And not too far from now, and which we're starting to embark on, is looking at storage from a resiliency or reliability perspective. Having a market where you could actually bid these assets in to help with capacity or energy problems in specific load pocket. And then as we see in California through the PG&E, grid independent storage could be part of that portfolio of solution that could potentially help individuals get off the grid or businesses to curtail their load tremendously. And last but not least, vehicle to grid. As we get these higher goals for electric vehicles, and we're starting to see the ramp up of the Teslas of the world, the Volkswagen, the EV Go, how do you incentivize this market? And what other business opportunities can we benefit the grid and individual customers when you think about storage? And that's what specifically I want to talk to you here today about, is the future of that. And next slide, please. And the future of that is what I consider, and I take a lot of pride in this, is the first make-ready site for energy storage and EV chargers on a utility property. And now this picture is just to show a schematic of what our vision is. It's not in any way a replica of what exactly will be at the site. But as Griffin talked about the BQDM project, we know our loads are growing tremendously in the Brooklyn, Queens demand load pocket. In a specific pocket in the Brooklyn, not too far from the Barclays Center, we have one of the fastest growing network, but it's also gentrified. The load area is also being gentrified. In conjunction with that, the city is actually being active with the Gowanus Canal cleanup, and it's rezoning this entire area from being a light commercial to more residential commercial. We, in the past, had procured this parcel of property to build a new substation in the event that we needed to offset our loading on our feeders. Because of the the high penetration of distributed energy resources, that need for that new substation is no longer within our planning horizon. And as such, we decided to actively take a role and foster the market for energy storage and EV charger by opening up our utility property for third-party owned storage and energy and electric vehicle chargers. So basically, we're enabling the market for third-party owned EV chargers paired with energy storage. And what the site is basically is a 10 megawatt site or both reverse and forward power flow of energy storage paired with 18 stalls of electric vehicle chargers, which could be a combination of level 2 and DC fast chargers. The business model is very unique and simple. One, we're enabling this market by extending our distribution system to this property line. If you look at that picture, there's one structure there with a white top, and that is basically a block house where we'll house or 2500 kVA transformers. And what we're offering developers is basically extending our distribution system, bring our transformers, step down our primary voltage from 27 kV, and offer a point of common coupling of 480 volts for energy storage and electric vehicle chargers. Now, the unique thing about this is we are solving the interconnection issues. The developers do not have to do that interconnection. Con Edison will do that interconnection with collaboration with our DG group, and we will extend our service for third party to put their asset for a lease payment. Now, what does this do is, one, it offers resiliency benefits to us. It enables the market by offsetting the real estate and interconnection costs, which at times could be quite tangible. It's offering publicly accessible DC fast chargers and level 2 chargers without occupying street parkings or taking up more street parking. It's also enabling us to achieve this New York State and New York City energy storage and EV goals, as well as leveraging our experience with our 2 megawatt, 12 megawatt lithium iron phosphate installation that we built on our system, and our relationship that we have established with the AAJs, being FDNY, the DOB, and foster that relationship so that when storage developers come on our property, we'll enable them or bridge that gap so the discussion could be much more easier, and we could potentially get to a faster approval of these systems as we hit our commission date of Q2 of 2021. Next slide. This slide basically shows some of these opportunities of revenue earning. It's not all encompassing, so it's not one stop, and we're not limited to these opportunities. Because of the nature of the energy storage system at that site, what Con Edison is providing is full flexibility to developers to operate their system and participate in any markets that they deem necessary to fulfill their bottom line. Some of the recommended program we're pushing is the traditional T&D deferral program through NWS. Even though we don't have an active NWS portfolio at this time, it could potentially become an NWS load area. Some of the programs such as CSRP or DLRP that Griffin also spoke about before, and what those payments are. In terms of the New York ISO market, the ISO is setting up to put out a roadmap for energy storage resource in Q4 of this year. And we're anticipating that being a huge revenue source for storage developers. And as such, we're installing 2 revenue grade meters for this site. In the event that developers decide to put 5 or less megawatts, 2 5 or less megawatt system, or a system that is greater than 5 megawatt. And also encouraging the pairing of these assets to potentially use the storage as an offset for the EV chargers and exercise some level of energy arbitrage. Together, we're hoping that these systems could not only achieve these goals of the storage, but also create revenue stream and encourage developers to think outside the box, encourage utilities to think outside the box, and how to open up opportunities and do one-of-a-kind systems like this. Next slide. Now, in terms of the EV value stream, because of the nature of pairing this electric vehicle chargers with energy storage, we're actually trying to demonstrate to the regulators that pairing these assets makes sense. And it's a good use of resource by adding a positive load modifier and offsetting it with which is EV, and offsetting that load modifier with a negative load modifier, which is energy storage, that ultimately the grid should see a net zero load if it's paired and exercised appropriately. Now, the unique thing about this area, the only restriction that Con Ed is put in is to ensure that you're not charging during the corresponding network peak. So our intention is not to add to our network peak, but other than that, you could exercise or operate your system as you see fit. So in terms of EV chargers, some of the benefit the utility is carving out for themselves is basically capital investment in utility in-plant system, or traditional feeders or traditional pipes or traditional wires or transformers. This is what we do, and this is what we're bringing to the table. We're also, as part of providing value for our customers, we expect a lease payment from the EV operators and energy storage operators, because we have to show that we're providing value for our customers through this property. We're also strategically trying to demonstrate the benefits of being an EV charging site host, as well as providing infrastructure that can help clean energy-related projects move forward in the future. Some of the benefits we're seeing for the EV operators are basically private EV drivers could come there and plug their vehicles in. We're a couple of blocks away from the Barclays Center. You could certainly plug your electric vehicle there, go watch a game, and come back and have it fully charged. We also see opportunity for New York City fleet, public fleet vehicles, as well as for hire vehicles such as the Uber and Lyft and medium-duty delivery vans. Next slide. So now, I know I went a little fast on this, but most of this stuff that I'm giving you is on the website. If you go to Con Ed project opportunities through this link that is provided, you'll actually see our RFP for this site. The RFP is still open. It closes on April 17, and we're actually having a second Q&A session for developers to ask their questions or any clarifying questions that they may have as they try to bid or put their asset on this site. We're also working with our DG interconnection team to help go through these process, as well as answer developers any questions, any tariff questions that they may have, or any other opportunities that they're looking to carve out of this that we didn't address. And together we're hoping that we could have a successful project by end of Q2 2021. Next slide. So in summary, what we're vouching or what we're pitching for this site is that we're continuing supporting the growth of energy storage. We're doing this by a couple of ways. One, we're continuing to work with our AHJs and streamlining that process, and we're willing to share some of those lessons learned and help foster the relationship of developers to these entities. We're also testing this make-ready model for third-party owned asset on our distribution or on our utility property, as well as working with our in-house DG group to provide step-by-step instruction through interconnection and compensation opportunities. And we feel together these approaches, if paired correctly, approached the right way with an open mind, could provide cost-effective solutions to deploy these assets on our system and would ultimately provide maximum benefits for our customers. And that's all I had here today. I'll take any questions as we go through the remainder of this program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mo. We have about 8 minutes here for questions. So Emily, has anything come in while we've been on?
Great. Yeah, that was a great presentation. We have a couple questions here. So I guess I'll start with Luke. We got a question. Can Luke elaborate on the interconnection study completion requirement for the residential incentive program? Luke, do we have you there? Oh, okay, I've got a question.
We may have lost Luke. Do we have a question for either Griffin or Mo?
Where I was about to jump
Luke
to.
Luke is here. Can you hear Luke?
Oh,
yes,
there now. Yes, now we can.
Were you able to hear the question, Luke?
Yes, but I'd appreciate it if you could repeat it. It had to do with a residential?
Yeah, it said, can Luke elaborate on the interconnection study completion requirement for the residential incentive program?
Okay, so for the residential program, we're looking for the fully executed interconnection agreement. For the retail program, which is for commercial projects, less than 5 megawatts, we're looking to see that the Caesar study has been done, and additionally that the project developer has paid the 25% utility upgrade construction cost.
Great. So let's jump to one for Griffin from Con Ed. So someone asked, you mentioned Con Ed is looking to move forward with NWAs in the Newton area or Newtown area. Is that the same as the Newtown RFP from 2019, or is there a new program coming in the future?
Thanks. Yeah, that is the same that we already put out a request for proposal. So my team has gone through and assembled a working portfolio. So what I meant by looking to move forward, we will be filing with the Public Service Commission the details of our benefit cost analysis for that portfolio probably within the next month and a half. And so that will be official that we're moving forward with that program. And yes, that was some energy storage has been built into that portfolio, but at this time we've contracted the total that we need, and we'll be keeping our eye out on the forecast. Possible that forecast will shift, and we may need to go back out for more in the future, but we won't know that until the fall after the summer experience. As of right now, the program is full.
Great. So we have another question for Luke. You were asked if you could please explain the DLM program in LIPA territory.
Sure. I don't have too many details on it. It's available both for residential and for non-residential customers. It's $40 per kilowatt per year, except if you're in a high demand area, in which case it's $60 per kilowatt per year. The customers or the project aggregators receive a call notice several times a year, and if the battery system discharges to the grid during that peak time, the customer is paid that $ per kilowatt figure. And I believe it's a 10-year offering.
Great. So we have one more question for Griffin. So this is phrased that they're a little confused about demand response. They're asking, what is the aim of this for the customer towards the host or Con Ed?
What is the aim? I'm a little confused about the question, I guess. So the purpose of the demand response program is to help our local grid out, and then the customer that responds for us, the purpose there is to give us that help. We then pay them through the demand response program. So DR is generally considered lower load behind the meter, but in recent years it has also grown to encompass exports as well. There's some little nuances there in terms of that export. The DRV value is removed from value stack if you're participating in demand response with exports. But overall, the goal of demand response is to help alleviate load on our peak days or on days that we're having issues with our system, and for the customer's angle, their whole reason for participating is the payments themselves.
Great.
I hope I answered the question. I was a little unclear, so if there's a follow-up, please let me know.
They wrote in that helps a lot, so I think you covered it. Thank you. All right, we just got a question from Mo. It says, regarding the Nevin Street project, is it located within FEMA flood zone? If so, what kind of resiliency measures is Con Ed considering to protect the energy storage system? And what battery chemistry / manufacturer is being considered?
So 2 questions there. One, it is not within the FEMA flood zone. We're actually, the flood zone plus 100 feet ends right across the street from the property line. Given the fact that it's that close to the property line, we are taking steps to make our system resilient. And basically what we're doing, we will be elevating the blockhouse as well as elevating the pads for the energy storage system. Even though, so just to reiterate, it's not a requirement, but we're taking it a step further as part of our Make Ready site and elevating it for potential flooding. The second part in terms of what energy storage chemistry, did I get that right, that we're looking at?
Yes.
We don't have a particular chemistry in mind. Developers are free to put whatever system they feel is adequate, but we are more inclined to specific form factor of a 40-foot container, so that will pretty much limit the chemistries to any lithium form and not a flow battery or any other types of batteries.
Great.
Is that it, or is there more?
There was one more general question that was sent out to everyone here. It asked if NYSERDA was aware of contractors' interconnection issues in the Con Ed territory, and if NYSERDA is doing anything to help with that.
Okay, was this an interconnection issue for a specific project or more general interconnection issues? I know we're involved with the Interconnection Policy Working Group, the Interconnection Technical Working Group. If this is related to a specific project, I'd invite the requester to reach out to one of us directly. But we are aware, that there are some issues with interconnection.
Great, thank you. I think that covers all of our questions for now. Again, if you have more questions, please send them over to questions Sustainable CUNY. And anything we don't have time for, we will ask the presenters to answer after the webinar. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emily. And we'd also like to thank Luke, Griffin, and Mo for a very informative session. Our final session is coming up now, and I'd like to think that we saved the best for last. Not only is it a very interesting topic that's directed to the installers and developers out there on the business opportunities that exist with a number of New York City programs and initiatives, but it features three of my favorite people, three people who I'm honestly happy to call friends as well as colleagues, and probably some of the hardest working city employees in New York. We're going to start off with Ellie Kahn, who's a senior policy advisor with the Mayor's Office of Sustainability, and she's going to give us a rundown on the new local laws, particularly local laws 92 and 94, which are going to have a real impact on the solar market in New York City. She'll then be followed up by Hamid Lekic from DCAS, that's the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, the landlord for all the New York City buildings. And Hamid is going to talk to us about their initiative to install solar and storage on city-owned properties. And finally, we'll be hearing from Chris White from the New York City Housing Authority, who will be speaking about NYCHA's solar programs and their target of installing 25 megawatts of solar on public housing in New York City by the year 2025. We'll start it off with Ellie. Ellie, you've got your title slide up here, so take it away.
Great. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, very well.
Great. I will get started. As Ron kindly mentioned, my name is Ellie Kahn. I'm a senior policy advisor at the New York City Mayor's Office of Sustainability, and I'll discuss some of the policy drivers if we can move to slide 2. So we've heard a little bit about the city goals and the state goals. We know that sort of 80 by 50 was a useful stepping stone, but now we're in the era of carbon neutrality. And in support of that goal, we've set out ambitious storage, solar, and electricity goals to help us get there. 2019 was a really big year in terms of renewable policy. You had the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act from the state, but in addition, the city passed the Climate Mobilization Act, which has a variety of laws that sort of will take our first step towards that carbon neutrality goal, and produce millions of tons of carbon reductions, thousands of jobs, and generally changes the way we think of the built environment in New York City. Towards the end of the presentation, I'll give a quick teaser into what's coming ahead. 2019 was a big year, but that doesn't mean it's time to rest on our laurels. We really have to sort of double down on what we've been working on. So the details of what's in store are still formulating, but you'll hear it here first, and we'll welcome your input as we develop things. We can move to the next slide. So as Ron mentioned, Local Laws 92 and 94 are a very important law in the realm of renewables because we're now requiring green roofs or solar on new rooftops. In general, this law is to change the way we think about rooftops. They can't be sort of passive spaces. They now need to be put to good use within New York City, either for sustainability purposes or for other purposes, but they have to be put to good use. To the next slide. Ron, oh, okay, great.
Yeah, there's a little bit of a delay. I've got my finger on the trigger here, but it's sometimes 3 or 4 seconds before it goes through the system.
No worries, and thanks for advancing that for me. So when does this requirement come into effect? It already has, is the good news. It applies to new buildings, vertical or horizontal extensions. So if you're building another story on top of your building, or bumping out your kitchen, that new roof area would be subject to these requirements. Roof membrane replacements, which are sort of the standard roof replacement that most people do on a regular basis, are not required to comply with this law. However, if you're replacing the full decking, not just pieces of the decking, you would have to comply with the law. So if you're doing the sort of more structural work and replacing the entire decking, you would be triggering this law. Unlike other laws in the Climate Mobilization Act, this particular one applies to all building types and sizes, whether that's a single-family home, a warehouse, or a skyscraper. Again, that's very different from the other laws, which typically only apply to large buildings. The one exception is that certain types of affordable housing have an alternative pathway for 5 years, and that alternative pathway might include solar. Thanks, Ron. So you can choose, building owners can choose between green roof or solar. They can also do both. If one isn't feasible, say the roof is shaded and is not suitable for solar, you would be required to install green roof there, and vice versa. One thing that's very exciting about this and makes it sort of one of the more ambitious sustainable roof laws globally is that it requires that we use all available roof space, 100%. And I'll get into exactly what available roof space means, but we think that's a really powerful signal to the development community. Quick note on cool roof requirements. Those were expanded through this new law. There's higher reflectance and admittance standards for flat roofs. There's now a new pitched roof standard, which did not exist before. It's not the same. You don't have to have white shingles or anything like that. But that's now a new requirement. In addition, cool roofs are required underneath solar, which they were not in the past. But you should be doing that anyway because they do increase the efficiency of the modules by keeping them cooler. In addition, the Department of Buildings Bulletin specified that in order to comply with this law, you need to be using modules of 15% efficiency or greater. Something that's very exciting is that even though these roofs are solar and green roof are required, they're still eligible for the property tax abatement. So what you'd have to do is put the solar in your plans to, in your NB or Alt1, and then submit an additional Alt2 to be eligible for the property tax abatement. And Barry talked a little bit about this yesterday, but yeah, you're still eligible for it. You just need to make sure that when you're working with the general contractor that you're getting all those permits in at the right times. I also want to let you know that there is a green roof property tax abatement as well as a solar property tax abatement. So when I said available roof space, that could mean all kinds of things. Basically, it means that, we understand that roofs are used for other things, and that's fine. We also understand that interesting architecture is something that's valued in the city, so we don't want to stop that from happening. So basically, things that are on the roof, such as skylights or architectural features or HVAC equipment, can be deducted from that 100% coverage. In many cases, you should be working, though, with the architect to design the roof features to maximize the solar or green roof deployment, and then make sure it's easy to maintain. You also have to comply with all fire department and zoning rules. Those aren't suddenly waived, and they can be deducted from that 100% space. Another exemption is that if you have a really, really small roof space available, we're not going to make you install sort of one module on the top of a skyscraper because it doesn't really benefit anyone. It's not a useful use of that space. And so if you end up having like a very, very small space available, you're not required to install on that. We want people to be using their roofs. We don't want to ban rooftop bars or roof decks or anything like that. So recreational spaces are allowed. They have to be on the certificate of occupancy. One thing I wanted to mention both about the rooftop equipment and also recreational spaces is that roof canopies are not required under this law. When you're doing sort of a solar feasibility analysis, you're not required to report what it would be if you did a canopy system. But you should be working ideally with the architects to try and make sure that those are an option and that they can maximize solar that way. The final exemption I want to talk about is a general sort of catch-all site conditions exemption if there's some sort of site condition that prevents the technology from being feasible. For example, structural issues around green roofs or shading for solar. I also want to encourage you all to work with your local green roof professionals. Green roofing under solar can be a really useful tool. It increases the efficiency of the modules by keeping them even cooler than a cool roof might. It also provides the shade for the plants. The plants benefit from it as well. And what you see in this picture here is actually a solar array that's been ballasted by the green roof. Which is a pretty innovative solution, and we hope to see more of these moving forward. So the impact of this law is pretty substantial. It's among the strongest strongest sustainable roofing policies in the world because of the fact that it applies to all buildings and has 100% coverage. By 2030, we anticipate this will result in 300 megawatts of additional solar capacity. We believe that's in addition to what's happening in the market today, but since most of that is retrofits. So we think that will be a big boost to the solar industry in New York City. Another piece of the Climate Mobilization Act was the enabling legislation for commercial PACE. For those who are not familiar, PACE is long-term debt, property assessed clean energy, is what it stands for. It's long-term debt up to 30 years with lower interest rates than you might otherwise find in the market. The way it works is that since it's property assessed clean energy, it's associated with a property. So the owner of a commercial or multifamily property would take out a loan from a participating PACE lender in order to perform energy conservation measures, and then would pay back the loan via the property tax bill. The way that PACE is intended to work is that the savings from the energy conservation measure would cover the cost of the loan over time, so you end up not sort of paying out of pocket. Another feature of PACE is that it sticks with the property, so even if the owner sells it, it will stay with the property, not transfer with the owner. And also that property tax-exempt entities are still able to use PACE, even though they don't pay property tax bills. So there's a lot of questions here about third-party ownership, which I understand there might be some issues here, considering that the loan is for the property owner. But but basically, there is a way that third-party ownership is feasible. For example, if the solar array is not owned by the building owner could use PACE to prepay a power purchase agreement as long as the system is physically located on the tax lot where they are claiming the loan. Soft costs are eligible for PACE. Those include permitting, engineering studies, and legal closing fees. And generally, PACE is considered a sort of retrofit kind of product. But renewables are seen as their own distinct projects. So renewables are eligible for PACE on new construction, and those include geothermal, solar, storage, and many others. We're hoping to launch this soon. As you can imagine, many timelines are up in the air right now, but we're hoping to launch sometime in the next few months, and then NYC will be administering this program. And now for the cornerstone of the Climate Mobilization Act, which many of you have probably heard of. This is Local Law 97. This is the first time any city has made landlords responsible for the emissions that result from their buildings. Each building will receive a budget for carbon. That is for buildings over 25,000 square feet. And they have to stay under that budget. Those budgets will get more constrained over time, and so that the carbon is being reduced slowly as we move towards carbon neutrality. The fines are $268 per ton of CO2 equivalent, and for some buildings that could end up being in the millions of dollars per year. So we think this is going to be a strong law encouraging people to do energy efficiency and clean energy measures. Affordable housing does have an alternative path of prescriptive measures that is slightly different from the emissions caps, though. So unlike affordable housing, for most buildings, compliance is not prescriptive. Building owners can choose to do envelope work, HVAC work, clean energy projects, what have you, as long as they meet their, they stay under their budget. But solar can be useful in helping meet those carbon targets. If you have a behind-the-meter system, that reduced consumption will reduce the amount of electricity that you are reporting, and therefore reduce your carbon carbon emissions. We are very interested in making sure that front-of-the-meter systems are incentivized through this law. So we've developed this capacity credit, which would provide some kind of incentive for front-of-the-meter systems. Exactly how that's going to work and what the capacity credit will be is still being worked out at this point in time, but it is a priority to have solar storage and community solar in particular, and we want to make sure that this law incentivizes that. In addition, this is a carbon law. It's really about reducing carbon, and therefore, as we've heard from other folks' presentations, that time when energy is being consumed is a really important thing. So storage and time of use are included. Exactly how they will be credited is to be determined. Right now, reporting through reporting on benchmarking is it doesn't include time of use. It just has an annual total, and so we're working on figuring out how that might be incentivized through Local Law 97. Finally, on Local Law 97, Zone J RECs are an option, and what that means is that the renewable resource has to be within the 5 boroughs or directly connected. So, for example, offshore wind being connected to the Gowanus substation would sort of count towards those RECs. Those RECs cannot also, if you are claiming the RECs, you can't also claim the capacity credit or anything like that. So they have to be kept separate. And moving forward, every year the mayor does a State of the City address, which is similar to a sort of State of the Union, but for the city. In the mayor's State of the City address this year, solar was a heavy focus, and in particular on the 1 to 4 family market, because of all of the progress we've made in large buildings, we're starting to look at the smaller buildings. So we want to double solar citywide. The mayor committed to helping 50,000 homes connect to solar, whether that's community solar or rooftop. and committed to developing a program to help people through that process and connect them to resources, installers, and other things. Exact details on that are still to be determined, but we welcome your input and are happy to hear how you think we might be able to accelerate progress in that market. In addition, something that's very exciting is that the city committed to pushing for an expanded and extended property tax abatement. As someone else mentioned, the property tax abatement for solar and storage are slated to end at the end of this year. We are advocating for not a 2-year extension as has been happening in the past, but a 3-year extension to provide a bit more certainty for the market. And then also creating an expanded property tax abatement for large-scale systems, which in New York City, we're considering that over 200 kilowatts. That is really geared towards incentivizing community solar to try and free up those sites, which we've heard from other speakers that site acquisition is really the main challenge. If you're providing an additional sweetener that goes directly to the property owner, we're hoping that's going to spur more community solar projects within New York City. And then finally, we also said we would advocate for residential PACE, so having a similar program to commercial PACE, but making sure that that's available for smaller buildings as well. I just want to share these useful links. Feel free to take a screenshot or I know that these will be distributed after the fact, but I just want to make sure you had access to more information based on what I've said today. And with that, I'd like to close. I want to thank you all for your contributions to progress so far in solar and storage. We are very looking forward to doubling down on those targets with you to accelerate progress moving forward.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you.
We're gonna move right along here. Just bear with me 1 second, and I'm going to tee up Hamid's presentation. And here it is. We'll get that up on the screen in a second. Hamid, are you ready to go?
I am. Can you all hear me loud and clear?
We can hear you fine. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, let's go then.
All right. Thanks for having us. And I want to thank CUNY for setting this up, considering the situation we're all dealing with right now. We really appreciate it. My name is Hamid Lekic. I'm the Deputy Director for Clean Energy with the Department of Citywide Administrative Services, Division of Energy Management, Office of Clean Energy. Next slide, please. I'm going to speak a little bit about what DEM's role is within the structure of city government and how we roll out projects and participate in energy management citywide on municipal buildings. Next slide. So our goal is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by the year 2050. Ellie elaborated a little bit on that. We've had some updates as a result of the Climate Mobilization Act, and we have an interim goal to reduce for city government GHG emissions 35% by 2025. DCAS serves as a hub for city government's energy management efforts. We administer funding programs for energy efficiency projects to dozens of our agency partners. We oversee over 4,000 facilities, and that includes 10,000 plus utility accounts. We centrally manage the heat, light, and power annual budget of approximately $700 million for electricity, natural gas, and steam. And we have approximately $40 million annual program budget and a capital budget of over $200 million for energy efficiency, demand response, load management, and a number of other efforts. This next slide shows some of the things that we as an organization, DEM, specifically the operations unit, participate in. Budget, supply, and reporting, energy efficiency retrofit projects, both expense and capital, with all of our partner agencies. We conduct energy audits and studies per local law 87. And we do low-cost operational improvements, including retro-commissioning, preventative maintenance. We provide tools and training to agency partners. Another office in our operations unit benchmarks all of our city buildings and manages data for all of our facilities and makes that available to other city entities and internally within DEM for whatever use we see fit. Our office is Clean Energy, has a directive to install 100 megawatts of solar PV on city facilities, and we are actively involved in expanding that effort until 2025 and beyond. We also manage a city demand response program. We have the IDEA program, which pilots new and innovative technologies at our city facilities, and we fund over 30 energy staff at 13 agencies across the city. This is actually expanding, and I should also add that DEM is currently expanding in light of the Climate Mobilization Act and the increased efforts for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and becoming carbon neutral by 2050. In addition to all of the things I've just mentioned, we also provide contracting resources for our agency partners to utilize in implementing energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Next slide, please. So I'll tell you a little bit about what we're working on within the clean energy program specifically. So we do a number of things. We provide operations and maintenance via data and monitoring and asset management. We partner with our agencies to select sites for portfolio development via solar PV and energy storage systems. We fund education and outreach programs through the Department of Education with partners like Solar One, the Department of Corrections and Fortune Society. And as I mentioned earlier, through our IDEA program, we implement innovative technologies, which include solar and storage technologies that may not be sort of typical to the typical types of installations that you see on facilities, things like building integrated solar photovoltaics, as well as non-standard battery energy storage chemistries. And lastly, we provide procurement and contracting support for both internally and externally to our agency partners for the implementation of renewable energy projects specifically. Next slide, please. So what we currently have going on. To date, we've done over 60 solar PV installations completed on city-owned buildings, totaling approximately 11 megawatts. We are currently in the implementation phase of a large-scale power purchase agreement for approximately 17 megawatts of solar across 88 facilities in all, in all 5 boroughs. We also work with our city construction entities, such as the Department of Design and Construction, the School Construction Authority, the Economic Development Corporation, and various agencies which have the bandwidth to manage and implement projects themselves to provide funding to implement renewable energy projects, specifically solar and storage. In the coming months, there will be an RFP being issued by the New York Power Authority for a power purchase agreement across 50 sites totaling over 12 megawatts in all 5 boroughs and several upstate locations with our Department of Environmental Protection. This is slightly delayed in light of recent events, but expect that to hit the street within the next 30 to 60 days. That will be an open procurement through the New York Power Authority. And I will reach out to them and provide information on how, where that will be posted and how to access that information. In addition, we are currently designing a number of facilities which we will advance through a DCAS-initiated contract known as our pre-qualified list for construction services that should be hitting the street sometime in fiscal year 21. Next slide, please. So how prospective vendors can do business with the city? This is a question I get often, and there are a couple of things to consider in doing this. So first and foremost, not just DCASs, but all city procurement is posted to the city record online. I would encourage everyone to register for that and monitor it frequently. All of our solicitations through our construction entities, through agency-born initiatives, and those that DCAS issues publicly as well are posted to the city record, and requirements for participating in those are typically found therein. As I mentioned previously, we have a pre-qualified list for construction services, which includes a number of energy, capital and energy efficiency efforts, as well as solar PV. This is a list that opens yearly and is also posted on the city record. And we would encourage any new vendors to submit applications per the requirements of the pre-qualified list for construction services to participate in future energy efficiency and solar PV and potentially even energy storage projects. One caveat I should add is this is strictly for construction services, so we have to have designs completed. As a result, this is not a design-build approach. And in response to that limitation, we are developing a pre-qualified list for technical services, which will include things like feasibility studies, engineering studies, as well as design work that we can do to sort of springboard into construction work through both lists. Additionally, one of our major partners in implementing solar PV and renewable energy projects, including energy storage, in the state is the New York Power Authority, and they also have a pre-qualified list for distributed generation projects, and I will get more information on that and have Ron distribute that to all present on how to participate in that as well. Additionally, as I mentioned earlier, we do fund projects through the Department of Design Construction, the SCA, EDC, and other agency contracts on a regular basis. So the typical avenues for participating in those can also be explored as, especially in light of, as Ellie mentioned, the sort of rollout of local laws 92 and 94, we anticipate a dramatic uptick in our participation and funding of projects through these entities in the years to come. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, this is what we've got going on in the future. We have a pre-qualified list of vendors for technical services that is slated to release and accept applications at the end of this year. We will also be advancing open procurement solicitations for capital and power purchase agreements in the near future. Additionally, all procurement must adhere to PTB rules. This can be a dense set of rules that's difficult to navigate, but just know that if you have any questions regarding what the city can and cannot do with respect to obtaining services from various vendors, whether it be a feasibility study, design-build services, or any other construction services, the details can be found at the link provided there. And lastly, all vendors must register with the Mayor's Office of Contract Services Passport System in order to be able to do business with the city. So if you plan to respond to any RFP, RFQ, or do business with the city in any way, this will be an initial step into doing that work. So I would encourage you to head this off at the pass and do this sooner rather than later, as there's a review process associated with that. And I think that's it for DCAS. I'm open to any questions that anyone might have. And thank you for hearing me out here.
Thank you, Hamid. And as you said, if you can get that information to me about the NYPA RFP, we'll be sure to pass it along to everybody who's on the call today. Our third presenter in this session is Chris White, who is with the Sustainability and Capital Projects Division of NYCHA. I've had the privilege of working with Chris for the last 3 years on the NYCHA solar program, and he's going to describe it in some detail right now. So let me get his slides up here. There we go, and we'll set this up as a slideshow. And go ahead, Chris, you're on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, excellent. Hi, so this is Chris White. I work in the sustainability programs Department of the Capital Projects Division at NYCHA. I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about our 25 megawatt community solar program and what we've been doing to build solar on public housing and expand the opportunities for community shared solar across the city more generally. To start with a little bit of a introduction about what NYCHA is. If you don't know this, New York City Housing Authority, we are a public housing provider, and we also administer Section 8 vouchers. Approximately 1 in 14 New Yorkers is housed through NYCHA either via the public housing we administer or Section 8. Some of these numbers you'll see on the slide are a little out of date, but that's basically the story. Next slide, please. A little more context on our operating conditions. We're the largest landlord in North America. These numbers are a little smaller now because a number of our developments have been moved over to private management. Although we still own the land, I think it says 325 on that slide. I think it's about 306 right now, but we're still the largest landlord in North America. We still have well over 2,000 buildings, and a lot of these buildings are really old and have a lot of accumulated maintenance needs. We've had a steady decline in federal funding for public housing since 2000, and as of 2017, we have a $31 billion capital need that is only expected to grow. So it's a very challenging environment to work in. Next slide. In an effort to address these challenges and to help build sustainability within NYCHA, in 2016 we put out the Next Generation NYCHA Sustainability Agenda, which is commitment as a landlord to create healthy and comfortable homes that will withstand the challenge of climate change, and an invitation for residents and communities to work with NYCHA. And one of the strategies that was identified was to raise revenue through clean and distributed energy projects, which is what our solar program is. Next slide, please. So specifically, in 2016, we made a commitment under the HUD Renew 300 program to host 25 megawatts of solar photovoltaic capacity by 2025, which is 8% of the entire nationwide commitment. And as a part of this, we have several goals, such as to generate revenue for NYCHA through either saving money on electricity or through lease payments, to provide job training and green jobs for NYCHA residents, and to reduce energy costs for NYCHA residents who pay their own utility bills, Section 8 tenants, and other low and moderate income New Yorkers. Next slide. One of the things we discovered when we were putting together this program is that we were going to run this as community shared solar. The reason for this is we get our power from the New York Power Authority, and New York Power Authority's rates are quite low. Normally, with solar, you can put solar panels on your roof, and you'll save money with the basic Con Ed rate. But NYPA rates are low enough that it doesn't actually save us money, and as I mentioned earlier, our financial situation is such that we have to be conscious of saving money wherever we can. So we decided to structure this as a roof lease for community shared solar. And doing so will help us to leverage an underused asset to provide public benefit, our roofs. I mean, right now, we're not really using our roofs for much. They're just roofs. So this gives us an opportunity to put them to good use. This helps us get a modest lease revenue. These projects aren't making us rich, aren't making anyone rich, but every little bit helps. And we help expand solar access to low and moderate income New Yorkers, especially those like our tenants who are living in multifamily housing and wouldn't be otherwise able to access solar power. And the last and most important for this presentation is we want to help nurture a nascent market. We know that community shared solar is still fairly new in the city. There haven't been that many opportunities because there aren't that many large spaces that we can use. But our roofs are, while they're not large by upstate standards, they're still large by New York standards, and we can use that to help build a new market. Next slide, please. So this is just a little illustration of what community shared solar would be like. You'd have solar on your roof, and then the panels would be used by people who subscribe to the community shared solar end. It doesn't need to be on site; it can be anywhere within the Con Ed territory. I also wanted to just highlight some of the partners that we have that we have had while we've been standing up this program the past few years. Sustainable Community, who's obviously, thank you, Ron, has been putting on this presentation and has worked with multiple stakeholders from the fire department, Department of Buildings. They conducted a LiDAR analysis of our roofs to determine what our feasible capacity would be, and they've continued to help us with publicity, with evaluation, and with sort of workforce and consumer protection items. We've also had some help from the consultant from ICF, which provided technical assistance under Renew 300, and has continued to help us through a couple nice starter grants. Next slide, please. So the way we've structured this is, so far we've had two solicitations: the commercial solar RFP and what we're calling accelerating community empowered shared solar, or access solar. And basically the difference is the commercial solar RFP is some of our larger sites where we're sort of trying to maximize lease revenue for NYCHA. And in access solar, we're sort of making smaller, more scattered sites available, and there's a real focus on working with local developers and community-based organizations and nonprofits. And in those instances, we're expecting that the lease payments will be nominal because these are not necessarily very large sites. So there's less of an economy of scale. However, there are a lot of commonalities. They're both community shared solar. They are both going to help us reach the 25 megawatt goal. Very important, they're both focused on roofs that are new, not planned to be replaced. One thing that has been a huge help in setting this program up is we have a large roof replacement pipeline, taking our old roofs and replacing them. City funded, I think it's like $1 billion, trying to get 700 roofs, and that's in the early stage, and that's in the early stages that's going to be going on, and those roofs are going to be primed for solar when they're done. We also have a requirement to hire and train NYCHA residents. Normally, whenever anyone does work on NYCHA property, there is a Section 3 requirement if we're paying the contract. These are roof leases, so it's not legally required, but it is still a core programmatic requirement, because we always have to put our residents first. And then we also have a requirement to enroll low and moderate income residents, including those NYCHA households that pay their own electric bills. Most NYCHA households are in master meter developments where we just pay the electricity, it's included, and they get the NYPA rate. However, we still have about 6% of our portfolio, about 10,000 households, that pay their own bills across the city, and they are a prime target for what we would like to see be subscribers. So for the commercial solar program, we released our first RFP in late 2017. We made an award in 2018, and 2 proposers were selected for up to 6 megawatts of power on 90 roofs and 13 parking lot canopies across 8 developments. Made a commitment for $3.5 million in lease payments over the next 20 years. And we finally, after some protracted legal wrangling, finally signed our first lease for rooftop solar at Queensbridge North and Queensbridge South in late 2019. There will be 2 megawatts across 27 buildings. Next slide, please. Under these commitments, these 2 developers have promised to hire and train up to 28 jobs for NYCHA residents, mostly in installation, but coupled for subscriber outreach, and subscribing about 600, 700 low and moderate income households. In general, it's going to be a 10% savings off the Con Ed bill, but could be up to 15. So for the first lease that was signed with team consisting of Bright Power and Sole Purpose and some other folks, they have put together their training cohort already. They had a cohort of 17 NYCHA residents in northeastern Queensbridge and surrounding developments receiving solar installation training. They had a 2-week class that just wrapped up, and they were able to do it in person before the lockdown came, and they're currently doing their online OSHA 30, which is really great news. And we're hoping to see these panels start installing in the next, hopefully, month or 2. Obviously, everything is up in the air given the current situation, but it's coming really soon. And one thing to note is that in terms of nurturing a nascent market, right now, this Queensbridge installation is projected to be the largest community solar array in New York City. It's 2 megawatts, not huge by upstate standards, but it's pretty big by New York standards. Next slide, please. So for access solar, we took a slightly different approach. We had an open online application process. We included over 300 roofs in the initial screen. We had a requirement to form teams ahead of time and to include local nonprofits, community-based organizations. And one thing that was also a huge help with Access Solar is, with the help of Sustainable Community, they have a shared solar gateway that helps make connections between developers, nonprofits, and also has a section for residents who want to subscribe for community solar. It's a great resource. Just want to plug Ron and the community team work in putting that together to help make the connections that are needed to make these community solar projects work. Next slide, please. So the Access Solar is also currently in implementation phase. We selected 5 teams to develop full proposals on up to 6 megawatts. At this point now, we currently have still in the program we have 4 teams with about 5 megawatts remaining. There have been some. We've had to move some things around, but we still have 4 teams about 5 megawatts in process. We've given them a license agreement so they can go on site and do their due diligence while they put together their proposals, and we work on lease negotiations. And we've had some collaborative knowledge sharing meetings with NYC and CUNY. We're hoping to have another one coming soon on best practices for subscriber outreach, which especially for low and moderate income subscriber outreach, which is one of the things that's actually very important, especially these days. How do you do subscriber outreach to a population that might not be able to just reach them online in an environment where you can't really do things in person? So that's a challenge that we're sort of thinking about and working through, and could be good best practices for going forward in the future. So far, we have 2 proposals in so far, and they're currently undergoing evaluation and lease negotiation, and we expect that the first Access Solar projects will go online later this year as well. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the hurdles and lessons learned that we've come across in this last couple of years of standing this program up. Number one challenge has been these negotiations. We, as a public housing authority, and really in the case of any public agency, we have many restrictions on what lease terms we can offer, what we can agree to, both technical and programmatic. And also, community solar leases are still very new here. This community solar was only allowed, I think, 2015, 2016, and there really haven't been many projects yet. So we're really making a standard here. And we're hoping to use the first couple leases as a model for other agencies. Another thing to note, these are relatively small sites, but large for New York City. Individual roofs, you'll have 40 to 50 kilowatts per roof, but you can bundle them because many of our sites are campus sites with, like, say, 10 buildings in a development. So you can bundle that into a larger project. And since they're small sites, we know that they're not going to be like high-end commercial. They're not going to make us rich. They're not going to make the developers rich. But our goal is to really spread solar and to save renters some money on their electric bills. And also, we've had some good news recently as well. Some bureaucratic hurdles are being lifted. As you heard earlier from the Consolidated Billing Order from the Public Service Commission is huge for this program. It's really going to help get subscribers in. It's really going to lower the confusion and make it easier for them and make it easier for everyone else. And another thing is I want to specifically mention, which was allowed recently, the NYC multifamily housing adder, which is, I think, 40 cents a kilowatt. That was recently expanded last year to include community shared solar. Previously, it had just been for on-site, but now it can be used for community shared solar as long as there is a percentage of the array that is dedicated to low and moderate income subscribers. And that was a conversation we were involved in, and we were really glad to see that go through. And I think that's going to really help our developers and help this program succeed. Next slide. So then, what does the rest of 2020 and beyond look? As I said, our first systems, both commercial and access solar, are expected to go online this year. We're going to have future rounds as our roof replacement pipeline moves. We're still figuring out the best lessons learned from our legal negotiations and what our design review is going to be like. But you should expect to see our next RFP in whatever form that takes come probably late this year. We continue to work with internal NYCHA stakeholders to develop best practices for solar, with our legal team, with our design team, and also with our resident engagement. Obviously, working to get these leases happening, and of course, very important, this is not just for NYCHA. Our goal is to build a model for community solar across the city, so that all of New York City renters, I think it's like only about 20% of New York City would be able to use solar without community solar. It's really important that we scale this up so that so many New Yorkers that rent and can't have solar on their own roofs can still access the benefits of solar.